Porn is like a drug. Plain and simple. Think of it, if you have empathy, if you can think of somebody who's an alcoholic or a drug addict and understand what happens to their body as a result of that substance, you have to think of pornography as the same thing. Now, it's just not something that you smoke or you drink or you ingest. You bring it into your body just through your eyes. But the research and the science shows that it impacts your body and your brain in the exact same way. Your brain actually rewires itself because of the artificial stimulation. When you do something good, your brains release dopamine, oxytocins, and other chemicals. When you eat something that you like and it tastes good, a little bit of dopamine. Ooh, that's good. And you remember that. And you go and you're consciously not saying that that's happening, but your body is making an imprint. You talk about those lines in your brain, and that behavior or pattern is rewarded. And so you go back to it. And so we have to understand that as we look at pornography, and especially coupled with that point of masturbation to orgasm, that's where the chemical flood really happens. And that's going on in your brain. And then this drives us to come back to those activities. The activities that release the chemicals. This is normally a good process. And I want to back up 1 second here to this slide. I made sure I mentioned oxytocin. So oxytocin, if dopamine is the pleasure reward chemical, oxytocin is the bonding chemical. So back to that image of that 13-year-old boy or girl who's never even held another kid's hand and has now watched porn for 8 years, who has now maybe masturbated 12 times a week for 8 years. And that oxytocin drips every time they do that. This is the sick part. Our kids, us, we are chemically bonded sexually to our devices. And you know what's even crazier about this whole dopamine drip and chemical release? Is that can start happening even before the images go. And so when you're on a computer and you're doing mouse clicks and you've got 5 screens and flickers, well, you know what? The computer at school, when you're on the mouse, all of a sudden you're sexually stimulated. I gotta go look at porn. And if you don't have an outlet to look at porn, what's taking over your mind for the rest of the day? I can't wait till I get home and look at porn. Now all of a sudden you can't study, you're not concentrating, you're not there, you're not present. The phone, you could be on the phone. The simple swiping your hands and flashes of the screen. Little drips. Not the full drip, little drips. And so now you're in that cycle. And you are going to find your fix. Just like a drug addict would. So we have to understand these processes that's going in. So what happens is watching porn actually hijacks this mechanism and causes the brain to release these high levels of chemicals or dopamine without the user having to do the normal work for it. Man, to your brain, it's a win-win. So this flood, and think about it that way, it's a great word. This flood of dopamine creates these reward pathways that lead the user to go back to that behavior. Now here's the part that I think if we reframe it around something like alcohol, everybody gets. Porn users quickly build up a tolerance as their brain adapts to the high level of dopamine that's released. As a result, users may look to find more porn, view porn more often, or even start watching more extreme forms. This is why we hear the story over and over. I can't believe what I'm looking at. A year ago, I would have thought you were sick if you'd be interested in looking at that stuff. And I think we all relate to this idea that an alcoholic that pops 6 beers, pretty soon those 6 beers don't do it for him, right? So it turns to 8, it turns to 12. And pretty soon beer doesn't do it for him, so it turns to something else. Porn is like a drug. The same exact thing happens. And so when you cut this dopamine rush off, it can lead to withdrawal systems, just like a drug addict. So this is important for us to realize as we're going to address it. I think you'd all say it would be ridiculous to tell an alcoholic, just stop drinking. Would you ever say that? You would say, man, I think, okay, you can't drink, but you're going to need support. We're going to need to have all these different levels of intervention and resources. It's going to be hard work. We're going to have to work you through it. Why is it different with porn? Why do we expect our kids to have one conversation and they shut it off when there's an addiction and a chemical and a physiological process? So when we say viewing porn is like a drug, it's not just a metaphor. But the good news is, and this is that last point there, the reward pathways can be restored. This is the amazing part. Because if this part wasn't there, then this is a real bummer and a downer of a message, right? This is kind of like you screwed yourself up, too bad. But the brain is plastic. These pathways can be rewired and restored. And I don't want to give you a time. For some people, it's 3 months. For some people, it's 6 months. I will say the danger, the difference between a young mind and an adult mind is different. So there's a lot of people my age who already went through puberty and started getting into internet pornography with an adult mind. Those ruts are there, and they take time to heal. But the adolescent mind, in terms of its growth and the way those neurological pathways connect, is a lot more susceptible. So if you're 10, 11, 12, 13, and you've drawn those lines in your brain, it's going to take a lot longer for them to heal. And it's not easy. But with support, with the right help, and you stop watching porn, those pathways get rewired. And you start protecting your sexuality, and you start making those choices, your brain goes back to the way it was designed to be. And the violence, the aggression, the isolation, all those other things can turn around. So there is hope in this.